Welcome into K-State Online. I am Mason Voth. That is KSU Fan. Here we are. Hey, Mitch, congrats. Was that your mom that won the trip?
Yes, it was.
Wow. Congrats to your mom.
Hi, Mom.
Are you getting to go to Ireland?
I am going to Ireland.
Okay. Because of her win?
No.
Okay, so your parents get to join you now.
They get to go. They weren't going to go, but now since they won the flights, they're going to go to Ireland. I'm going to PA, so I get to go for free anyway.
Oh, okay. My bad. All right. Well, the Fortner family going to have some fun in Ireland. And sounds like they got to do it without the help of cats2ireland.com. Yeah. All right. We are here after another loss for K-State basketball. Their 16th loss of the season. They fall to Iowa State today by a not very pretty score of 73-57. Nothing about the game was pretty. We know that K-State certainly did their share to make it look ugly. The officiating was kind of all over the place. It had nothing to do with why K-State lost today, but it just, again, was kind of the highlight of where Big 12 officiating stands this season, especially on Saturdays when everybody is playing. Like, these crews are just spread out too thin. You think about some of the constants that you've seen recently in Big 12 officiating. John Higgins obviously hung up the whistle. Now he's kind of in charge of overseeing all of these guys. Jerry Pollard has retired from officiating, so like he's not doing games anymore. And you also have more teams in the league. So you, in the span of 2 years, went from only having on a Saturday needing 5 officiating crews and 15 officials to now you need 8 crews and 24 officials. And there have been some weekends where there hasn't been enough, and that's why the Big 12 has had to play some Sunday games this year because they're just spread too thin. And we saw it today. Chris Passy and his crew, what was going on in this game, but we won't focus too much on that because it has no bearing on what K-State just did out there, because what they did was ugly enough themselves and probably a fitting way for this team to end the season.
Yeah, it was. We've seen this team, the ceiling. We only really saw the ceiling for a 6-game stretch, but the ceiling was pretty high. But we also know the floor is the difference between the ceiling and floor in this team is about as much as I've ever seen in a single team in a single season. Following K-State basketball for 37 years. Today, I thought, it was about what team was going to establish their style of play. I thought Iowa State came out and did that. I think they had 18 points in the paint in the first 10 to 12 minutes of the first half, building that 16-point lead. K-State did kind of go on a little 8-0 run to make it a little more interesting at halftime, and then battled a little bit early in the second half. And then Iowa State goes on an 11-0 run to put it away about midway through the half. So I thought it was really about Iowa State attacking the paint and then playing inside out and then playing great defense. We know Iowa State's a great defensive team, but K-State had tied for its worst offensive efficiency this season with the Arizona State game. And once again, is under 10% from three. You're not going to win games shooting that poorly. We know that. And the thing is, K-State had kind of risen to being a decent three-point shooting team during that winning streak, but they've shot 24% the last 8 games combined and have 4 games in that stretch where they're under 19%. That's dreadful three-point shooting, and you're not going to win games shooting that poorly, even if you don't rely on the three too much. And K-State probably does rely on it too much, but that's just not going to get it done.
Here is one of the concerning things to me. Drew and I talked so much throughout the offseason about we thought this team, it was built to be better at shooting the three in theory. And they sit here, and even though the overall percentage on the season is better than last year's team, in Big 12 play, K-State ends up shooting under 31% from three. Last year in Big 12 play, they were 33%. That was good for 8th in a 14-team league. As of now, K-State is sitting at 10th in a 16-team league in the Big 12. That's a huge flaw, and it isn't fully because they don't have shooters. I mean, you can look at some of it and say, on the topic of Coleman Hawkins shooting, maybe last year was a little bit of fool's gold. because he was 4.5 attempts a game last year and shot a reasonable percentage for a player in his role. And then so many other guys, but you bring it in, and I think this comes down to the way that this offense is being ran, and it's not necessarily about what is being run currently. It's about the fact that there hasn't been any adjustment at any point where we've seen K-State get consistently good looks. People want to at least see that there's some effort being made, and it doesn't feel like that's there, and that's where you get into this flow of just having to hope that you make shots. Because, yeah, the game of basketball is simple enough to say, hey, you make shots, you win games. Like we've heard Jerome Tang say that before. That is true, but not everybody shoots the ball well. They still sometimes find a way to win, and that's because they are creating good looks for themselves on offense, and that at least takes some of the pressure off of having to have one of those good shooting nights. And K-State, when they were at their peak this year, like you're talking about, they were able to do that against Arizona. They shot terribly in that game from 3, but they were so good elsewhere that it didn't matter. And yes, they had some points during the streak as well where they were just making shots. But over the course of this full season and last year, we've seen that this team with just an average roster can't create opportunities for themselves. It took in year 1 to have 2 of the 15 or 20 best players in college basketball on your roster, because that's what Marquise Noel and Keontae Johnson were. They were 2 of the top 20 players in college basketball that year. It took those guys to be able to have even a respectable offense. And you could even go through and look to see at other points, like that team turned the ball over a lot too, but they were a lot better in other areas. They also forced their opponent over, forced turnovers on their opponent a lot more too. So I think that's the biggest issue with this is we again saw a game start, and through the first 4 or 5 minutes they go by and nobody seemed to get a clean look. You don't get a ton of great looks for Brendan Hazen. And again, I love Brendan Hazen's game, but he's useless if you're not going to get shots for him.
Yeah, and the shots were rushed. There's one off the dribble early, and that was. I mean, guard play overall to me has always been the key to college basketball. In Ames, the 3 starting guards were 7 of 14 from 3. Today they were 2 of 14 from 3, and you're just not going to get it done with 1 for 5 from Doug, 1 for 5 from House, and an 0 for 4 from Max Jones. That's not the kind of efficiency you need. That was mentioned in the chat by Bracket Cat. Doug was again inefficient shooting the ball. 14 points on 11 shots. He did get to the free throw line. It was 7 of 8, but most of those came in the second half after the game was kind of already decided. He did have 6 assists and 3 turnovers. And that's the thing with as you look toward the future. McDaniel, he's going to have, looking back over the last 35 seasons, he's going to have one of the top 5 or 6 seasons for a point guard in assist to turnover ratio, assist rate. So that's been good, but the shooting efficiency has been what's been puzzling, especially he came to K-State as a 35+% three-point shooter, and now he's in the 20s. And, he relies so much on the floater, he doesn't draw fouls, so he doesn't go to the foul line a lot. And he's not real efficient on making the floater either. So the efficiency shooting the ball is the problem. The assist and turnover stuff has been good as the season got along, and he's picked it up incredibly on the defensive end, but K-State's offense can't be this poor and win games. You can't play good enough defense to do that.
Yeah, and he plays a pretty large role in the offensive problems because his efficiency lately has just been bad. Ever since Coleman Hawkins went out with his injury, he was shooting under 30%, and he did not shoot it very well today either. Efficiency hasn't been there like you talked about. The three-point percentage has been a steep decline from what he had been at Michigan. And I know some people are questioning it. So where do you stand on what his role should be, and do you bring him back next year? Because we've talked about this a handful of different times with you, and it got to the point where it was trending like, yeah, you bring him back. I think you still do if it makes sense, but I also don't think that, like in an ideal world, is he your your starting point guard night one next season?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't think rolling the dice and going to find another your fourth starting point guard in 4 years is the ideal situation. And I do the efficiency in the shooting has tracked in a majorly bad way. I think I just looked it up. He's like 4 of 25 from three the last 5 or 6 games, and that's not good enough. But the defense on this team has improved a ton over the last month and a half, 2 months. We were tracking to be rated in the hundreds in defense, and this team is going to finish ranked in the 30s in defensive efficiency. So that's a good thing, but I don't know. I mean, I'm torn a little bit because I see the rationale and I see the concern with the lack of efficiency from K-State's 3 starting guards over the last month, even going back to the Arizona game, which we won. And you want some continuity. I agree with you. Continuity for continuity's sake is not it. But at the same time, resetting the roster every year has proven to be not it either. So it's going to be a roll of the dice either way.
Because then you put yourself in the position to where if you reset again next year, you might have another guard that it takes time to acclimate. I mean, I understand it was under a different coach, but Marquise Noel wasn't exactly Marquise Noel his first year at K-State. Like, it took him being and probably adjusting a little bit. And we saw flashes of it, just like we saw flashes of it from Doug. And I mean, I would even say that Doug has been far better at times his first year as a junior at K-State than Marquise Noel was. And as we know, like, if you're going to say, well, you know, Marquise Noel had Bruce Weber as his head coach that first year, well, then Doug McDaniel's getting 2 years of Jerome Tang instead of Marquise Noel only getting 1 year. So, and I'm of the belief that there are problems that have to be fixed that would make it easier to judge Doug McDaniel. Like I said, I think the way that the offense has ran and been set up is a problem, and that makes it tough to accurately grade guys. We know that the depth is a massive problem on this team. Some of it because of, you know, Achor was probably factoring to be a guy that played at least 20 minutes a game. He's not even on the roster. Ugana and Yinso was unplayable today. And all of these other things, like, you can look at and point to as problems. So I think it makes it a little bit tougher to accurately grade him. And right now, as we know, Jerome Tang's going to be back next year. So you have to be able to find a way to just get better with that situation, and I think improve things around Doug. Like, to say that I'm confident in what that looks like next year, I'm not. But I don't know that you're going to be able to guarantee yourself a better position in the portal for a guy that could do something. And so it's about what else you can surround him with. And like I've said along the way, for the guys that I'm certain that you bring back, it really just comes down to only a couple where it's probably Doug, Hazen for sure, because he's one of only 2 guys that can come back next year that we know for sure, that has an actual skill that plays at this level of college basketball, and that's a shooting ability. And I know some people are going to bemoan it and all this. He's a 40% three-point shooter in the Big 12, so shut up. And he's got a crappy offense. So, yeah, to get shots sometimes because he's a shooter, he's got to take some real crappy ones. Is part of that his problem and he needs to think a little bit more sometimes? Yes, but I would say the greater problem is the fact that he has a bench full of coaches that don't seem to have the ability to get him a good look most of the time. So that is one of the things that I'll watch for next year, and where you kind of have to start, I think, when you're talking about what K-State does in the offseason and the transfer portal, is building this thing up to where you can make it a little bit easier on Doug McDaniel, because it's clear he doesn't have the ability right now to just kind of take things over and, no matter what's around him, be efficient. And to some extent, like, you could say that's probably what happened with Marquise Noel when he was playing. Like, the only other person he had that was worth a dang on that team was Nigel Pack, who was the lead guard, and then maybe sometimes Mark Smith. So, like, it took bringing in guys like Keontae Johnson, and it's unlikely you're going to get somebody to that level. but bring somebody else in that can do that. Find some other guys like they did with that team that it has to fit, and you have to make yourself become a little bit more immune to when it's not going to be your night, you're going to lose most of the time. And that's the problem with this team this year, is that almost every game where it wasn't their night, they lost.
Yeah, for sure. The one that stands out that it wasn't their night and they won was Arizona. You could probably say the same thing about Cincinnati on the road as far as offensively goes. But you're right. I mean, I think there has to be a reset in the offensive philosophy for what this team is doing. This year they're 112 in offensive efficiency right now, adjusted in Ken Palm, and last year they were 139. I'm actually kind of surprised they're better this year on offense, given what we've seen. The thing that they flipped is, even though we're not great at it, this team was a lot better at taking care of the ball than last year. We were almost last in Division I in turnover rate last year. This year we're rated in the 200s, so that's an improvement. But then you see other things flip. The first 2 years, K-State was really good at getting to the free throw line, top 60 in the country both seasons. And this year we're 318 in free throw rate. So there's always seems to be something gives the last 2 seasons in a major way that ranks in the 300s. And when you have stat categories that rank in the 300s, that's going to drag down your offensive ability to be consistent. And as we've said, K-State's three-point shooting has dropped off the face of the earth these last 8 games, now down to 24% over those 8 games combined. Only one of those games over 33%. So anytime you're shooting like that, and I think you have a system where you rely on the three, because K-State's still taking 38, 39% of their shots from three, that's just not going to be able to get it done. So that's the mix. I do take some confidence into next year that this team did finally buy in on defense, and that's really what kind of led to the turnaround. And even in this struggle the last month or so, today wasn't great. The Arizona State game on the Sunday wasn't great, but the defense has more often still been good than bad in Big 12 play. But again, once your offense drops to this low, when you're 0.8, 0.9 points per possession, you're just not going to win games, and you just can't sustain it. I mean, that's kind of the way Bruce Weber built the program, and we saw that become unsustainable as well. So you got to get some offense and some efficiency on offense if you want to win in the Big 12, and K-State doesn't have enough.
Yeah, is Doug a guy that should be better at getting to the free throw line than what he has shown at times? Now, he got there. I think he made 4 trips today with 7 of 8. So you would take that on most nights, but he doesn't seem to get to the rim as much as he should, maybe. And that's the other thing too. It's not just about if he gets there and gets fouled. We saw basically after the Arizona game, he was not good around the rim, which he had been. He had been pretty creative. He had used the glass pretty well. That totally went out the window over the end of the regular season.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen both Noel and Perry last year as 2 very small guards also be pretty good at drawing fouls in the paint. And I think the issue is Doug is a floater guy, and he relies on it so much, and you're just not going to get foul calls when you shoot floaters around the rim. You just aren't going to get it. And he kind of draws away from contact. And, Perry and Noel both got their fair of shots blocked around the rim. But because you got to go put a shoulder into the chest of your opponent and take a chance getting that foul call. And that's just something Doug doesn't try to do. Now, that's something that can change. It's maybe something they can work on. And the floater game's fine, but you got to make 40% of those or 45% of those if you want to use that. And obviously that's not happening either. So that balance and what kind of 2-point shots you take and how you take them factors into how you're going to get foul calls. And the way Doug's game is built right now, he's not going to get foul calls the way he's doing it. He did a little more tonight. Like, I thought he did attack and try to draw contact more in the second half and got to the foul line because of it. But we haven't seen that much all season besides tonight.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you're our most level-headed panelist we have at KSO. I think we brought this up during football season when it was a crappy November, and there were people that wanted, Connor Riley's head. I had a thought during this game. I was like, if this was a football team, there were, bad things said on the message board about Connor Riley. I can remember numerous signs trying to be snuck in during the Dana Dimmel era when I was still in school. I can only imagine what signs Rodney Perry would have had snuck in if he was a football offensive coordinator. So because Jerome Tang is not going anywhere financially, that's just not something K-State can do. And yes, he's missed the tournament 2 straight years. That's not acceptable, especially with the resources he's been given. But I don't think that you totally pull the plug on it yet, because I do still think that there's something there that could be figured out, but it's a concerning stretch that they're on, and I think changes have to be made. So where do you stand on what should be done moving forward with not just obviously they got to bring in better players, but do you see staff changes as being necessary, since really the only thing that's changed since they've been here is that Kevin Sutton who was, not really an on the court coach, got a different job and left the program. So everything else has mostly remained the same. So is that somewhere where changes need to be made?
Yeah. I think it's got to be a next step is to bring in some fresh ideas for the offense. And I think that probably has to be from a new coach to get that done the right way. Obviously, we talked about it. This offense is not – this kind of offensive efficiency is not going to get done in this league. And that's got to be the first thing to address. We've seen the defensive flip, and we've seen the defense become pretty good. I think they're going to end up one of the top 4 defensive efficiencies in the Big 12, top 5, which is acceptable. But you can't be 12 in offensive efficiency. And that 12 was buoyed a lot by a really good stretch of basketball over those 4 or 5 games. When the offense was really good. So I think that is the natural progression. I think I wouldn't even say there's true heat yet on the seat, but the heat's close enough. I think that some sort of change on the staff is probably something that's almost got to be done.
Yeah, I think something in some way has to be done, because I'll go back to something that Ron had said earlier when I made the comment about an average roster. He said, but this roster was handpicked and bought by Tang, so another check mark on the side of Tang's inability to be a head coach. Look, like, that is where you are right in some way. Like, this roster played like an average roster, but I still look at a lot of the pieces on it and think there should have been a path to where it was better this year. And yes, we can put some of it, like, you can put a lot of what took place in the non-conference, I think, on the players. I think that's where you look at it and say, the issues we talk about today about offense and shooting and all that didn't lose you a game at Wichita State. Wichita State's not a very good basketball team. I know, yeah, they're winning games in the American now, good for them. But K-State should not have lost that game. That was Wichita State playing in the middle of their worst stretch of the season. They had just lost at home to Kansas City. They snuck past a Division II school, or maybe it was Friends they played, so maybe it was NAIA instead of Newman. I can't remember who they were playing. And then they started off horribly in conference play. And, we know everything else that went down, like the second half collapse at St. John's. You had to kick a chore off the team. Like, just a bad stretch of basketball. And then some of the other losses that took place in the non-conference. That's really where this season derailed K-State. And I think that's where you look at it and say, okay, the players caused some of those issues, but they came along. I think it's clear that most guys, once they get in here and lock in, they like Jerome Tang. They like playing for Jerome Tang, and they want to play hard for him. But you got to playing better teams, more talented teams. We know that the Big 12 is loaded with pretty good coaches. And once you got into that, you faltered. And I think that's where it becomes a coaching problem. So to what Ron is saying is, like, this was an average roster because they got put in a position to play like an average roster, as opposed to, I think that they probably should have been better than that. And that's why I think there need to be some changes and some improvements elsewhere, because they didn't accomplish things in the way that they probably should have. But it's really tough to just kind of think about what this team struggled with and then how it kind of changed throughout the year, because the problems are endless with this team. I said it yesterday on our show that we were doing, but Iowa State is a team that has an Achilles heel. Like they have a certain weak spot that sometimes if you expose it, you can beat them. They can become beatable. K-State just wasn't good enough at enough things. Or maybe on the flip side, it's more like they were just bad at a lot of things to where they were beatable on about any night by about any team. And we saw that throughout this season because they had a lot of losses that should have never happened.
Yeah, I mean, and you're right. The non-con is what cost this team. You played the number 205 ranked non-conference schedule according to KenPom. You played one team ranked in the top 60 on KenPom, and you went 6-5. That is just not acceptable. And now the part about the offense in the chat from Ron, the defense lost those games. You give up tons of points to LSU, to Liberty, to St. John's, to Drake, to Wichita State.
Yeah, you got 20 from Caleb Rich in the game against Wichita State.
I mean, you had awful defense in those games. All 5 of those games were 1.05 points per possession allowed or worse, and 1.11 in 4 of them. That's just the defense really not getting it early, because that's what Ting has won with. Even in year 1, we had much better offense with Keontae Johnson and Marquise Noel, but the defense still carried that team in a lot of games. And this year that did not happen. Let's face it, 9-7 with the quality wins K-State has gotten, even with some bad Big 12 losses, should be enough for most Big 12 teams to get in the tournament if you're just decent in the non-conference. And K-State being dreadful in the non-conference is what is costing them an NCAA tournament berth this year. And they still have some bad losses in Big 12 play. I'm not going to say they don't. Arizona State at home, Oklahoma State on the road. Those are games you should not lose. But this team did enough at the Big 12 to go dancing. They did not do enough in the non-conference to get there, and that's why they're not.
Yeah, if right now you just took 3 losses away from K-State, they're an NCAA tournament team. And especially in the season that we've seen with how weak of a bubble it is. So that's a problem. And we know now, like, it turns into, we'll see what they have to do in Kansas City. I'm fairly certain that with the loss, they are now guaranteed to play in the evening session. So that bottom half of the bracket, like I've said, that's where you want to be if you at least want to try and tell yourself that they could go on some little run. 5 games in 5 days is very unlikely in the Big 12. So we'll just, see what happens. But I'm sure the hope for a lot of people would just be play a couple days so we can, I don't know if I would say enjoy watching this team, but it's a lot more fun to be at the Big 12 tournament when your team is still playing than not. Also, I know a fan wants to see K-State get to Wednesday so he can actually experience one day of it. So we're hoping that works out for you. But we'll turn the page to what this team looks like moving forward now, because we know that there have to be things that are done to bring in new players, and those names will start to circulate in probably about a week and a half or so. We know what the team looks like as it currently stands right now for next year, at least kind of in theory of what could be out there for this team. So I'm going to throw names out to you that are able to be on next year's roster, and you tell me if you want them back and maybe explain to what extent you see their role being. Or because, like, I will phrase it, there are certain guys that I say there's no doubt about it, you want them back next year. But there are also guys I say it's fine if they come back, but don't make any decisions based off of them. If you're like, oh, we can't bring this guy in because this guy will leave, that's fine. He doesn't matter enough. Or, oh, well, we can't bring this guy in because he's going to do this, or we should bring this guy in. He can split time. No. You have to look at this and say there's only a handful of players that are actually important to winning next year. The others could help, but they're not important in the grand scheme of things. So we'll just start off the top here. I'll just go in order of their eligibility. So Tyreek Smith, the Memphis transfer that never played a game for Memphis this year, that they brought in, that they're going to try to get a waiver for so he can actually play next season. Where do you stand on Tyreek Smith for next season?
I mean, I like that he's played. We talked a little bit about him. I think after the last game, he's played 90-some games in the Big 12 in his 3 years in Texas Tech and Oklahoma State. He's got some experience. I don't think he's a starter. I don't think he's going to be one of your top 5 for sure, but he can definitely be a rotational piece and give you some depth at the 4 or 5 spot that they don't have currently. I mean, you got a couple guys. We'll get to other ones, but I think he's a guy and he's here. So even though he didn't play for this team, he kind of helps that continuity piece because he knows the system. He's experienced. So I think he's a guy you try to keep.
Ron says, won't the players you want back depend on if there's a new offensive philosophy? I'll tell you this much, Ron. If there's not some kind of change there, I don't know that it matters if you bring in new players or old players. You would just have to really hit it out of the park with the talent that you're bringing in. Like, you would have to bring in your version of Noel and Johnson from year one to make it make sense. So I don't know that matters a ton in this exercise. Brendan Hazen.
Yeah, I think he's gotten better on defense, which is big. He struggled shooting the ball down the stretch, but he's still going to be a solid shooter, and he's going to get better hopefully with a year in the system. I think he's a good piece to keep on this team. And you said it before, shooting is a skill that's hard to find, and he can shoot it, even though, and he's up and down. That's what shooters do. They have games where they go 5 of 6, and they have games where they go 1 of 6. So he's still net for the season, but a positive part of this team. I think you want him back.
And is defense and some other things that I didn't really think he had in him. It got better over the latter half of the season. Doug McDaniel.
I would tend to want to keep him. I know there's some things that we talked about that he's got to get better at, but he's still got pretty good assist numbers. And again, like Housen, he's become a much better defender as the season's gone along. And again, I go back to the analogy of bringing back a quarterback. I think bringing back a point guard is kind of like that. And I think the odds of going out and finding someone that's going to be better, brand new, is not as high as the odds of this team being better with Doug McDaniel as a point guard next year.
Okay, you compare it to a quarterback. If you had to compare him to a K-State quarterback, or let's see, we had internet cut out there for a second. Can you hear me still?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay. If you comparing him to a quarterback, what K-State quarterback would you compare his situation to? It can be recent, or you can go into the annals of whatever's in your head in K-State history, but make a comp there that would either make people understand, at least, either good or bad.
I would go with maybe Jesse Ertz, but not getting injured his second year.
Okay. Okay.
Because the 1 year of Jesse Ertz was not great, but it wasn't bad. Like, he was a solid quarterback that season.
Yeah.
And then he was going to be.
Is it bad that I almost thought of, like, that might be too good of a, like, that?
No, I think you might be right. I think
Ertz's first year of actually playing was probably better than Doug's. Not in terms of team success. Like, we know that team won 75% of their games, but
the comp might be, and that he's not going to become this good, but probably L. Roberson his first year as a starter, because that was rough. Like, there was a lot. That was a 6-6 team that ended up 6-7. Wasn't very good, but L. Roberson was rough and kind of played half the season with Mark Dunn splitting time. Now, he became a pretty good player. I'm not saying Doug's going to become that, but I think that's probably the comp.
I was going to say, it might sound crazy, but I think that's the better one, even though L was lifting a Big 12 championship trophy when all was said and done there. So, I don't know, but I think that probably makes a lot more sense, because obviously I was 5 years old when K-State won that Big 12 title, but based on how I've heard people talk about the L. Roberson experience kind of as a whole, but like in the build up to it, it's, a little jumping around there. So that one probably makes sense. Let's move on. It probably is about to get a little bit tougher. Real quick, Max Jones, if he could come back, I assume you want him back. I think most people do. So that's one where I'll ask you about what would that role look like? Because he started this year, he played a lot. Like, for K-State to be successful next year, like getting back to the tournament, can he be in that same role, or do you need somebody that bumps him down a little?
I would say ideally he's back and he's your sixth man. He's your first guard off the bench. I think that's probably for K-State to get better. That's what it has to happen.
And Ridge says this team needs a Desi Sills. In a perfect world, like that's the role that I think Max plays, and that's what when he was brought in, this staff I think saw him as. I think they saw him as a Desi that probably not as quick and not as great like handling the ball or setting up other guys, obviously, but had a better offensive skill set than Desi did. And I think he's another guy that just got pushed into a position where it was a role that he really wasn't equipped to play, and he had to do it. So that's why, and it's tough to go and make that happen. But if you could bump him down to that role, I think that drives you in a better spot. CJ Jones.
He would be more borderline for me. Like it might be an either or with him. And if you can't get Max to come back and you can't get the spot for Max, or you can't get him to come back as the first guard off the bench, then, it's probably not a bad idea to keep CJ Jones in that role. I don't think he's quite as good as Max, but he would be an experienced guy that has been here that could play that role. And it's kind of what his role has become as this season's gone along. So that wouldn't be a bad role, but it might be an either or with the Joneses.
Yeah, that's the sort of the run on guys. And I'm like, it's fine if you come back. I'm sure there's not a ton of resources financially being required for you, but like there's zero guarantee on what it looks like next season. Like you could see 3 minutes a game. You could not play some games. Because I think they're like CJ Jones is the perfect kind of player that he could go a couple of games not playing and then have a game where you go, he impacted winning. Like he helped you out there. He can be helpful. It's just you're not going to get it on a consistent basis. And again, because of either the poor roster construction on this year's team or the deconstruction that had to happen when you kicked a guy like a Chor off, like a bunch of dudes just got bumped up the pecking order and what they were expected to do this year. Here's a fun, hot topic. Ugana and Yinso fan, we're back next year. Defensive anchor.
He came in and I think gave up 4 straight baskets.
Yeah.
4 and 5 trips today
from all over the floor.
I just think he's a guy that you could probably go get a better portal piece. And I think, Tyreek Smith, we've already talked about, probably already has his role taken if he's any good. So, I mean, regardless, you've got to go get 2 starters at the 4 and the 5 spots, in my opinion. I don't think Ugo's that. And I think you can probably find something better.
Yeah, if you look, Tyreek Smith, the last year he played college basketball at SMU. He played 19 minutes a game. He was 58% from the floor, and he grabbed 5.5 rebounds, 1.7 blocks a game, and also 2.4 fouls a game. So I think that's you basically already have that. He's smaller than Ugo, but everybody talks about having dog in you these days, but I think Tyreek Smith definitely has more dog in him at least than Ugana and Yinso. Moving down the list, those are all guys that would be seniors next year, have 1 year of eligibility left. By fall, who they are going to try and get a red shirt for this year, so he would be a sophomore all over again instead of a junior. Where do you stand on by fall?
I mean, I think if you do what they did and redshirt, I mean, obviously trying to redshirt him, obviously you're trying to keep him for a reason. Like, I mean, I don't know why you would try to get the guy to redshirt so he could leave. So obviously they must see something in him that they think can be tangible and helpful for them. Much more of a project. High ceiling guy, was a McDonald's All-American, as you said, but I think you try to keep him back. He's a guy that obviously they must like if they're doing what they're trying to do to keep him on this roster. That's what it would seem to me anyway.
Another hot topic that people love to talk about. He's got fans, he's got haters. Buddy Rich.
I think there's been enough out there that he's probably a guy that's gone and you don't want to keep around. I mean, he didn't again, he didn't get in the game today. So obviously it's wild. They play him a couple games because you're out of bodies. I think maybe Moby was more healthy today, so they felt more comfortable playing him, and he took those minutes away. They were only using it was kind of like a Buddy was in the corner in behind the glass, break glass if you need the Buddy emergency, and that's pretty much what it was the last 4 games, it seems like to me.
Yeah, Coleman Hawkins missed a couple games. Buddy Rich played. Coleman Hawkins comes back. He did not play in either of those games in the Hawkins return. Moving down the list, this will probably be a quick one for you. Taj Manning.
Taj seems to be the perpetual culture guy that they want to keep on this roster. I'm fine with it. Like if he wants to come back, we have plenty of spots that he can do what he's been doing.
Okay. Yeah. It's, I think you need guys like that if they're happy to be here, they're going to do everything you need and they're going to work hard. You can have them. It doesn't matter if they play or not. Like, I think that's beneficial. You're going to have, if you want 15 roster spots and 15 scholarships, like, there's no reason to fill them all up with guys that can go get 20 a night. I think that would actually cause more problems than not if you had 15 guys that could go score 20 a night. Moby, we saw some flashes down the stretch. He became really the most reliable energy guy off the bench in his role, that 18 to 13 minutes a game. So where do you want him back, and what would that role look like next year?
Definitely back. I think he's a good piece, always plays hard, and I think he really learned the game and how to play at this level in his role as the season went along. I don't know how much bigger that role becomes, but I think he can be a solid rotational guy. Like he even has some time. There was even a few minutes tonight where he kind of had to slid to the 3 in a bigger lineup, 3-4 spot, because he can guard a lot of different spots with his athleticism as well. So I think he's a guy you keep.
Moby in his 11 minutes tonight was +2. The next best plus minus on the team this evening was Spencer Bain, -2 in his 0 minutes on the floor as he was credited with. So there you have it. The last guy remaining that you can have the decision on, because Ashton McGee and Xavier Wilson, they will be here next year. You can't say no, don't come now. David Castillo. And I think this is an interesting one because we talk about a guy like By Fall. They kept him around. Like, how does that development process end up looking? David Castillo is a guy that has to develop in a hurry to make it seem like that's something worth continuing on.
Yeah, I mean, I think you keep him. I think wants to be here. I think he's got a good attitude. It's disappointing because he's, his role really became to be a shooter, and he's not great at shooting so far this year. I think he's got potential to be a pretty good shooter. And then you squint, and this comparison was brought up on the board this week, and this is your dream as a freshman. Now, he played behind really, 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 really good players, but LJ Cryer averaged 3.4 points as a freshman and played 10 minutes a game. David Castillo's playing 10 minutes a game and averaging about 2.5 or 6 points per game. So doesn't mean he's going to become LJ Cryer and reach that level, but that was a jump. LJ Cryer went from 3.4 points his freshman year to 13.5 as a sophomore. So much bigger role, but I think that's your dream hope, your absolute ceiling is that he becomes an LJ Cryer type developer. And that was a guy that Jerome Tang was involved with. So I'm sure that might be what he's seeing there.
Yeah. LJ Cryer, though, did shoot 36% in that freshman season.
It's true.
So would have been nice for Castillo to sniff that. So, yeah, the way I'll see it, I can go through mine pretty quick because they're pretty defined. A guy like Tyreek Smith, I didn't really love that addition to begin with, especially when you find out that he needs a waiver and – like he's a 6'6" guy that doesn't shoot, so he's just going to have to come in and be pretty physical. This team could use a guy like that. We'll see. But he probably shouldn't top out at more than the 19 minutes a game he got at SMU. You want him to be a bench guy. You want Hazen back for sure. He's the only guy with 100% certainty that I say you want back, and I see no issues with you bringing him back. I know what you're going to get from Brendan Hazen next season. That's not a concern to me. he's going to play a good chunk of time next season. He'll play 25, 30 minutes a game or more, and he'll give you something most nights that you can benefit from. Doug McDaniel, yes, I think you bring him back, but that shouldn't hold you back from if the perfect opportunity falls into your lap to improve in some way, you can do it. But you just hope that tweak the offense a little bit, bring in some better players around him, make depth a little bit more something that can help you out. I think there's still a world where he is a better option to bring back than a lot of other things that could happen. But then once you get past that, like I don't see anybody else that plays more than 20 minutes a game next year on this roster currently. Again, CJ Jones can come back if he wants to, but no guarantee. Ugana and Yenso don't want him. So that brings you down to 4 open scholarships, 3 if Max Jones can come back, who I would want back. He'd be in that 20-plus minutes a game category, obviously. Michaela Rich doesn't need to come back, so then that gets you down to 4 or 5 open scholarships. And then I think everybody – it would seem like things are trending to where a lot of these guys do decide to come back, but there's no guarantees out there. So we'll have deeper conversation and a better understanding of what all that looks like once the season finally concludes and the transfer portal opens and this staff gets busy immediately, because that's something that they're going to have to focus on. Final question for you today, fan, and then you can also add any final thoughts from this regular season and what you expect in Kansas City from this team. But if the opportunity to play in the Vegas Crown or the NIT takes place, you want this team to do it? Where do you stand on that?
I think it depends a little bit on who you bring, how many you're bringing back. Like, I think that can be helpful, the extra practices. Although, you go back and forth with that with bowl games, it's even more probably overrated for a basketball team, especially in the portal era. But
NIT kind of made them worse last year.
Yes, yeah, it wasn't great. I don't know. If they talk to the guys and the guys want to play, I don't see any reason with not letting them play, but it's not something you have to do. If there's any monetary advantage, I don't know if the Vegas thing gives you more money. I don't know what's involved in that. The Big 12 is tied to it. So the thing is, I think the Big 12 will encourage teams to go to that if they're invited to it. So I think if you do get that invite to Vegas, and the thing is, K-State's in the mix in the metrics with all these other teams. Like, even though our record's not as good, K-State's metrics are just as good or better than the teams around them that might be in that spot. So I don't know if they want to do it and they think they can get some more buy-in and improve the team by it, go for it. But as we saw last year, there's no guarantee that really helps you out much.
What are your expectations for what this team looks like in Kansas City, considering that they will have a semi-gettable path to at least win a couple of games, try and make some noise?
I think I think today was I think we've seen pretty consistent effort, even when they've played bad down the stretch, except for maybe that Arizona State game at home. And I thought today they were out physical by Iowa State was the bigger issue. There's difference between being out efforted and out physical. I think it's likely they win that first game. I think they'll fight. I think they have a good chance in the second game, but they won't go further than the quarters if they make it that far.
Yeah, and I do believe with the loss today, K-State is guaranteed to be the 10 or the 11, so nothing else to come up there and mess with it. But, yeah, anything else you want to throw in today before we get out of here?
No, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, obviously we got to go get portal guys. We'll talk more about it, but I think you need at least two starters from the portal, and I've been kind of saying 2.5 because you need at least two starters and a 6-man, or 3 starters and, like I said, move a guy like Max to the 6-man. So that's going to be the target, especially if you bring Doug and Housen back, because I think those guys probably remain starters if they're back.
Yeah, we'll see how it all plays out, but we got at least the fun of Kansas City next week. Conference tournament week is my favorite week of the year. So can't wait to be up there, see who K-State gets. Actually, I think it's pretty much a guarantee that K-State is going, if they're the 10, they'll get Arizona State. And then I better look here. If Oklahoma State hangs on to win, I think it would put Cincinnati in that 14 spot. So you would get Cincinnati again if K-State was the 11. Most likely scenarios, they end up being the 10. So anticipate K-State getting Arizona State for a third time. I actually think that would probably be a good first-round matchup for K-State because there would be some serious motivation there because I think they would have – I mean, you should feel like crap for how you played against them in Manhattan a couple weeks ago. That would drive you. And then the matchup theoretically after that, I think would end up being either Baylor, KU, or West Virginia would be in that mix. So could be fascinating. But we'll see what it all looks like. All that will go final tonight. And so we'll have coverage firing up on Monday to preview everything in the Big 12 tournament. Drew, you got time to go a while on Monday? I wasn't asking you for what time. I was just asking, go for a long time.
Yeah, we can go for a while.
All right, we'll go for a while. We'll just talk everything Big 12 tournament. That'll be a fun time, and then we'll see everybody in Kansas City Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We'll be there regardless of the Cats playing or not. I'm not staying to Friday unless K-State's playing. Just getting that out of the way. That's too long to be there, and I don't want to sit around all day and just do nothing. Wait until 6 o'clock for games to start. So it'll be a fun 3 days. Look forward to everybody being there, eating expensive food that probably doesn't taste great, but is named after the schools, and buying expensive, ugly shirts, which has become a Masonville tradition at the conference tournament. That way, 25 years down the line, my kids will be like, holy crap, Texas was in the Big 12 at one point? Yeah, and let me tell you, I've seen 12, 10, 14, and 16 teams in this league. And by the time they're talking about it with their dad, there'll probably be like 20 teams in the Big 12. Or K-State will be in the Big 10. Who knows?